Part 2. The second part of the play opens in the Archbishop's Hall, Canterbury Cathedral, on December 29, 1170. The chorus begins by expressing their ongoing despair, feeling as though their suffering knows no end and hope is scarce. They reflect on the uncertainty of peace in the world, emphasizing the necessity for humanity to remain aligned with God's peace. They lament how human conflict tarnishes the world while highlighting the renewing power of death in the Lord. Ending with a sense of longing for change, they remark on the brevity of time juxtaposed with the enduring nature of their waiting. Emphasizing the theme of the spiritual realm's significance, the chorus echoes Becket's sermon by asserting that humanity's connection with God is pivotal for ensuring peace in the world. They express their profound faith in God, suggesting that spiritual death, symbolizing the sacrifice of pride for the sake of faith, brings about a renewal of the world and serves as the genuine source of peace. The four knights arrive, urgently seeking an audience with the Archbishop on orders from the king. Despite the priest's offer of dinner as a prelude to their discussion, the knights insist on immediate attention to their business. Becket enters and greets the knights, acknowledging the unpredictability of anticipated moments. He instructs the priests to locate his prepared papers on his desk. The knights then request privacy for their conversation with Becket, prompting the priests to leave. Becket's sudden mention of his papers on his desk signals his readiness for either arrest or assassination by the knights. By ensuring that his important paperwork is accessible to the priests, he prepares for his potential absence, suggesting he may not survive the encounter. His remark about the unpredictability of anticipated moments hints at his awareness that this encounter could indeed mark the moment of his martyrdom. The knights charge Becket with betrayal, claiming that as Archbishop, his foremost obligation is to execute the king's commands, portraying him essentially as a servant of the king. They accuse Becket of deceiving and misleading the king, exceeding the limits of his authority. This passage underscores the knights' staunch loyalty to the king. Just as Becket's allegiance lies with the Pope, theirs is unwaveringly devoted to the king above all else, and they perceive Becket's actions as a disregard for the superior authority of the crown. Becket refutes the knights' accusations, asserting his unwavering loyalty to the king. He questions whether their visit serves any purpose beyond reproach. When they confirm they have a message, Becket insists it should be delivered publicly as per the king's command, offering to counter any allegations openly. Before they can act, the priests and attendants reappear, preventing a private confrontation. Becket remains undaunted in the face of the knights' accusations, boldly instructing them on proper procedure. Charges should be presented publicly. He exhibits unwavering assurance, pledging to refute any allegations they may bring forth, even before hearing them. The knights appear hesitant, unsure how to proceed with their intended attack. The knights proceed to outline their accusations against Becket. The first knight alleges that Becket fled England to incite unrest in France, tarnishing Henry II's reputation before the French king and the Pope. The second knight asserts that despite this, the king extended clemency as an act of kindness. However, the fourth knight claims that Becket responded with further defiance, refusing to recognize the legality of Henry's son's coronation. The knights collectively view Becket as disloyal to the crown, showing no appreciation for what they interpret as the king's leniency towards his religious zealotry. Additionally, they believe Becket orchestrated the tarnishing of the king's reputation, attributing less responsibility to the French king and the Pope in the matter. Becket responds by asserting that he never intended to disgrace the king. He expresses admiration for the king and the authority of the crown, clarifying that his actions were always in obedience to the commands of the Pope, which he lacks the authority to alter. Becket denies any culpability for the decline in the king's status, asserting that he never intended such an outcome, despite carrying out the directives of the Pope. Instead, he portrays himself merely as a vessel for the Pope's commands. The first knight acknowledges Becket's explanation but insists that, regardless, the king has ordered Becket and his retinue to leave England. Becket refuses, asserting that he will never again be separated from his congregation. The first knight accuses Becket of disrespecting the king by defying his command, but Becket contends that it's not him personally insulting the king. Rather, it's a higher power, the law of Christ's church and the judgment of Rome. Becket warns that if the knights kill him, he will rise from his tomb and appeal his case before God's throne. Before departing, the knights threaten to harm the priests and attendants if Becket is not at the cathedral upon their return. Becket's complete submission to the Pope, and thus to God, since the Pope was considered the voice of God, is another example illustrating how he perceives his own will as being absorbed by a higher authority, the divine will of God. He sees himself as the instrument of this higher law, refuting the first knight's claim that he is personally accountable for the consequences of his actions on the king. Despite carrying out these actions, such as denying the prince's coronation, they did not originate from his own human will. Following the departure of the knights, the chorus reflects on their heightened perception of mortality in the world, attributing it to the imminent threat of Becket's death. They convey their acceptance of the inevitable unfolding of fate, acknowledging its influence beyond their control. Thus, they embrace Becket's martyrdom and seek his forgiveness for their past ignorance and reluctance to accept his presence in England. The chorus has experienced a profound shift. They now recognize their intertwined fate with Becket and his impending martyrdom, and they willingly accept their part in it. Surrendering to destiny, they acknowledge the bleak despair they once feared, now realizing it as an inevitable part of their journey. The four knights arrive at the Archbishop's hall, attempting to force their way in. The priests barricade the doors and urge Becket to hide, but he refuses. He sees this moment as the culmination of his life's waiting. When the priests inquire about their fate if he dies, Becket offers no certainty, viewing it as another aspect of fate to unfold with time. He asserts that the only way to defend God's law is to face death with acceptance. Despite his wishes, the priests insist on hiding him from the knights. The priests remain staunchly against Becket's martyrdom, concerned about the loss of their leader at Canterbury Cathedral. Becket, unable to offer them reassurance about their future, appeals to fate and the unfolding of time. However, the priests reject this outlook, refusing to embrace the vision of fate that Becket espouses. In this sense, they become even more influential than the tempters, as they compel Becket to seek safety against his wishes. The chorus expresses sorrow that Becket's death will force them to confront a spiritual reality that he had previously helped them to cope with and, to some degree, distracted them from. They fear that their souls will be laid bare, with nothing to shield them from confronting their true nature, forever united with nothingness. They pray to God for strength to face the reality of Becket's death. Becket's role as a spiritual leader has always provided the chorus with a sense of shelter from the daunting power of God and fate, whether he was physically present in Canterbury or not. However, with Becket's impending absence, they will now have to assume the role of their own spiritual guides. Following the chorus's speech, the setting shifts to the cathedral, where Becket is accompanied by the priests. As the priests attempt to secure the doors, Becket instructs them to keep the church open, even to its adversaries. However, the priests counter, noting that the knights are not ordinary men. They liken them to beasts devoid of reverence for the sanctuary. Just as the doors would be shut against a lion or a wolf, they argue, they should also be closed against these knights. The priests persist in their opposition to Becket's martyrdom. They reject Becket's vision of the church as an inclusive space that welcomes even its adversaries. Instead, they cling to a worldly perspective, viewing the cathedral as a fortress to repel any potential threats. This refusal to acknowledge the cathedral's spiritual openness reflects their resistance to embracing the uncertainties of fate. Becket once more commands the priests to open the door, admonishing them for their narrow, worldly perspective on the situation, which overlooks the divine balance between good and evil. He asserts that his commitment to martyrdom transcends temporal constraints, occurring beyond the confines of worldly events. He emphasizes that the only true victory over his adversaries lies in embracing suffering for the sake of the cross, and urges the priests once more to unbar the doors. By suggesting that his choice to embrace martyrdom transcended temporal constraints, Becket implies a resolution to the paradox of freely surrendering to fate while being predestined by God to become a martyr. He suggests that the moment he fully aligned with God's will, recognizing his fate as a martyr, occurred beyond the confines of conventional human time. As the doors swing open, the knights stagger in, slightly intoxicated. Despite the priest's efforts to conceal Becket, the knights demand his presence. Stepping forward, Becket declares his readiness to shed his blood in atonement for the death of Christ, offering his life in sacrifice. The knights demand that Becket revoke his excommunications, relinquish his powers, return all funds taken from the king, and once more swear allegiance to the crown. Undeterred, Becket reaffirms his preparedness to face death. Enraged, the knights denounce him as a traitor and proceed to kill him. Becket meets his death resolutely, unwavering in his conviction that he is fulfilling God's will. He steadfastly refuses to grant absolution or resign from his position, denying his adversaries the validation they seek. His faith in God supersedes all earthly allegiances and political obligations, remaining the paramount focus of his existence until the very end. The chorus laments, urging for purification of the air and the sky. They express their reluctance for the tragic turn of events, yearning to preserve their former way of life. Their suffering, once confined and understood, now plunges them into an abyss of despair following Becket's demise. A despair that feels timeless and overwhelms them with a sense of profound wrongness. The profound suffering that the chorus feared at the outset of the play has now engulfed them completely, dictated by destiny. While their previous suffering had boundaries and a sense of containment, now it knows no limits, extending infinitely beyond the confines of ordinary time. After the chorus's speech, the knights, having carried out Becket's murder, turn to address the audience. Reginald Fitzurse, the first knight, announces that each of the knights will present arguments justifying their decision to kill Becket, and he will introduce each one. William de Tracy, the second knight, asserts that they had no personal motive for killing Becket, it was solely their duty to the king. He emphasizes that they even had to mentally prepare themselves for the task, resorting to drink to ease their consciences. De Tracy's main argument is that the audience should recognize the knights' complete lack of personal interest in Becket's murder. Interestingly, Eliot has the knights break the fourth wall and address the audience directly. Their arguments appear to stem from a desire to avoid being seen as villains and to rationalize Becket's murder to themselves. While they present reasoned justifications, their demeanor lacks the unwavering conviction Becket had regarding his martyrdom, suggesting some inner turmoil about their actions. The third knight, Hugh de Morville, contends that Becket deceived the king and betrayed the trust placed in him. Initially appointed as both chancellor and archbishop, Becket was considered highly capable by the king. Had Becket complied with the king's wishes, there could have been a harmonious balance between spiritual and temporal governance. However, Becket quickly renounced the chancellorship, diverged from the king's policies, and embraced a spiritual devotion that clashed with royal authority, claiming an irreconcilable conflict between the two realms. Morville concludes by asserting that the knights acted in the interest of the people and deserve recognition for their actions. De Morville presents a cogent argument, relying less on emotional appeals to the audience. He portrays Becket as a clear-cut traitor who betrayed the king unnecessarily. According to Becket, the king aimed to merge spiritual and temporal authority, but Becket refused to compromise and instead prioritized his allegiance to a higher order, disregarding any potential reconciliation with Henry II. The fourth knight, Richard Brito, asserts that Becket bore primary responsibility for his own demise. He argues that Becket descended into madness, severing ties with rationality and displaying a disregard for the welfare of the nation while becoming consumed by his own obsession. Brito contends that Becket actively sought his martyrdom, orchestrating events to ensure his fate, even demanding to be confronted by the knight's swords by ordering the church doors be opened. He concludes by suggesting that attributing Becket's actions to an unsound mind would be a charitable interpretation of events, considering Becket's prior history of beneficial deeds for England. Brito's tactic of shifting blame onto Becket himself proves to be a compelling rhetorical maneuver. By labeling Becket as deranged, Brito portrays him as a danger to the nation and a self-centered extremist. However, Brito's argument hinges on dismissing the notion that Becket might have been following a divine plan preordained by God. By suggesting that Becket actively pursued his own demise, Brito implies that there was no divine impetus behind his martyrdom, undermining its spiritual significance. After the knights depart, the priests share their reflections. The first priest laments the harm inflicted upon the church by Becket's death, while the third priest asserts that the church has, in fact, been strengthened by the Archbishop's martyrdom. Speaking directly to the departed knights, he admonishes them to leave England, predicting that they will spend the remainder of their lives grappling with the moral implications of their actions, trapped in a perpetual cycle of self-delusion. Paradoxically, he acknowledges that, although their deeds are indefensible, they were somehow fated to play out as they did. The third priest concludes by expressing gratitude to God for granting them another saint. The priests have come to terms with the notion that Becket's martyrdom was ordained by fate, viewing it as a spiritually righteous event. Instead of being detrimental to the church, Becket's death serves as a source of spiritual strength and blessing. They express gratitude for the emergence of another saint, recognizing that the circumstances surrounding Becket's demise were divinely orchestrated. This belief in the knight's predestined role in Becket's death extends the notion of divine design beyond Becket's life to encompass the entirety of the play. The chorus concludes the play with praise for God, asserting that his presence is evident and affirmed in all creation, emphasizing the importance of continually acknowledging him through both thought and action. Additionally, they express gratitude to God for sanctifying Canterbury through Becket's martyrdom. The chorus humbly seeks forgiveness, acknowledging their apprehension towards the surrender demanded by faith in God and the overwhelming nature of God's love. They conclude by appealing to the Lord for mercy and requesting Becket's intercession in their prayers. The chorus has experienced a profound transformation since the beginning of the play, where they were fearful of succumbing to despair. Now, they have embraced their destiny, witnessing the world's metamorphosis and recognizing the presence of God in every aspect. This realization echoes the peace they previously sought, attained through a surrender to divine will symbolized by death in the Lord.